I'm here with Dr. Christian Baylis, founder and chief investment officer at Fortlake Asset Management. Christian, thanks so much for being a part of the Investment Leaders Forum New Zealand.
Thanks very much for having me.
Christian, much of traditional portfolio construction talks about diversification across asset classes, but is that enough to provide truly reliable correlations or non-correlations between investments?
Well, I think the question we've also got to ask ourselves, can we diversify within an asset class and provide correlations which are different to the asset class itself? And I think that's really the angle that we come at it from, is some of these bigger asset classes with lots of liquidity, lots of redeeming features, all of the cross currents that eventuate and happen through the fixed income market. In our experience, they haven't been fully utilised, and really what you've got is a unique opportunity to mix and match a lot of these cross currents to provide something that is a little bit different. So we really try to occupy this unique type of correlation sleeve within an overall asset mix, and that's really the way that we like to see the world.
So you've worked on an approach that really, it can be described in so many ways, but it uses common assets, common situations, a default. Everyone's familiar with that defaults happen and how they work, but common assets to create uncommon outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And really what you find is that the microstructure of these common assets or common markets changes through time, and that's natural evolution. And it goes without saying that as we go from one crisis to the next, there are going to be these improving features within the asset classes, and we've really taken it upon ourselves to try and grab those, bring them to the forefront of the product set. And with some of those types of features where you get, I guess, a greater certainty of cash flows, as opposed to what you used to see in the past, that allows you to build financial products and strategies around that. And that's not something that you've been able to do historically. And we think really a lot of these features tend to be sell-side orientated. They can be adopted by the buy side, and therefore they can be incorporated into an overall portfolio strategy.
Is it similar to how volatility was packaged and eventually you could trade volatility instead of being a thing that was just there in the market? All of a sudden it could be traded. Is that what you've effectively done with defaults?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. People know the VIX, and going back 30, 40 years ago, the VIX was considered an esoteric product. The reality is the default system is something that's really grown, become one of the fastest growing parts of the market, and it's got, I guess, a volatility bent towards it because it is correlated to high volatility, i.e. when corporates fall upon hard times, it just so happens that tends to be correlated to the more dislocated periods in capital markets, and that's really what we specialise in. That's our niche. That's where we have, I guess, the intellectual edge versus, say, other strategies.
Some asset consultants and advisors think about the Fortlake approach and portfolio as being a defensive alternative. Is that how you view it? Do you think that's an accurate label?
Yeah, look, it's defensive in the sense that it will tend to perform when your other risk assets aren't performing. I like to focus on probably our toughest period, which was December and November of 2023 when equity markets were up. That was probably our toughest time as a strategy. So in that sense, we're trying to sow the seeds for future performance through those leaner periods. And then what happened in January, February, March of 2024, we had a lot of out-of-court restructuring and defaults come through in Europe, which is the epicenter of probably poor underwriting. And we had a big uplift in our performance. So that just shows you, I guess, the seasonal effects of the default market and how it differentiates itself from the other more commonly known risk assets.
What other use cases can you see the Fortlake approach and portfolio playing in a broader advised portfolio?
Well, I think for anyone that ultimately wants a return in those dislocated periods, who wants to see something going up when everything else is going down, that's ultimately the flavour of what we're trying to achieve, but we're trying to do it in the lowest cost way. We've talked about the VIX before. That's a high cost way of getting access to volatility. We believe there's better methods and better conduits to access volatility, particularly through the bankruptcy/default market. And that's really what we've gone about trying to set out to achieve, a low cost, long volatility type strategy, which is at the end of the day a Puritan absolute return type product.
Christian, across this event, we've heard so many views on markets and themes, but also around how to frame those themes for advised clients. What have been some of your key takeaways from the Investment Leaders Forum?
2 words: mature cycle. I think from where we sit is we've come out of a 1 in 100 year pandemic. All of the fiscal largesse, the negative real rates, I guess the adrenaline that's been pumped into capital markets as a result of that emergency procedure. We're getting to the end of that road, and ultimately we've got to think about how markets will stand on their own 2 feet, and you've got to build a strategy with airbags in it. I think that's critically important. When you have the official sector stepping away, markets are going to be more volatile. You are not going to get the fiscal aid that you once did. And we all know what that looks like if we go back to the early 1990s and the 80s and the 70s, where central banks and fiscal authorities weren't as ever present in markets. I think that's the world that we're potentially moving towards. And so you've really got to think that through from an asset mix perspective.
Christian Baylis from Fortlake Asset Management, thank you very much for participating in the Investment Leaders Forum New Zealand.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.